Today, the Pasquotank County Sheriff released the names of the 7 deputies put on administrative leave and noted that the 4 who didn't fire weapons would be reinstated to active duty. The situation is still under investigation, so we don't know if it will result in criminal charges, but a close reading of the sheriff's own use of force policy suggests it certainly wasn't great policing. In a court hearing yesterday, the district attorney claimed that body cameras showed that Andrew Brown Jr. made contact with deputies while reversing his car, then moved forward, prompting them to open fire. If that's to be believed, and remember, we don't know if we have to believe these people because we haven't seen any video released publicly. The sheriff's own policy advises against opening fire in those circumstances. The actual local policy says, quote, shots fired at or from a moving vehicle involve additional considerations and risks and are emphasis rarely effective. I'm joined now by Jay Fortenberry, Elizabeth City State University Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice and former Police Chief of Edenton, North Carolina, and Kirk Burkhalter, Professor of Law at New York Law School and former NYPD detective. Thank you all so very much for joining me this evening. Look, I'm going to start with this. I've said this publicly. I'm in favor of abolishing policing as it exists in modern times. But I do recognize that different policies work better in different places. So I want to start with this question, Kirk. We have found out that the use of force suggestions for the local county said that it's not a good idea to necessarily shoot at a police car. But at the same time, we're going to play this sound right now. The local attorneys are saying that Andrew Brown backed into people. So I want to get your thoughts on this after we listen to this sound.
If that's your position, show the tape. We already know if that was the case, then the media attorneys would not have to make an argument to show the tape. The tape will already be shown. If that exonerate the law enforcement officer, the media would have already seen the tape. In Columbus, Ohio, the tape was immediately shown.
So it seems to me, and as Ben Crump said once, it doesn't take an 8-year-old, that if the police are saying that Andrew Brown backed into them and created immediate danger, why wouldn't they release the video to the public for that to be the case? Is there any justification for sitting on that video?
I actually can't imagine why there would be a justification in this particular climate. So I think police departments do have to think about the climate. You want police departments to be objective, but we are in a climate where many segments of this country are losing trust in the police departments. And I think it's their responsibility to regain that trust. If a simple thing as releasing this video will help them to achieve their mission, that should be done. So you touched on this, that there's a lot that we don't know. And when the video is not released at this particular point, it allows for incredible amounts of speculation. And, the district attorney made a statement that, hey, you can't ask people to not smell a skunk once you wave it at them. However, let's take that a step further. Nothing will change that skunk from being a skunk or a bed of roses. It is what it is. Show the people the video, be transparent. And I think this has been a misstep with regards to this investigation.
Right. And also, when we do finally see some part of the video, if it's redacted so much that it looks like Morse code, then people still won't trust what the result is. Mr. Fortenberry, so I want to ask this question. I wrote a piece in the Grill. I talked about the idea of decertifying or delicensing police, right? There are standards that other professions are held to. If you're a school teacher, you can lose your license even if you don't break the law. If you're a school teacher and you buy beer for the state winning championships, you could lose your license. If you are an exotic dancer, you can actually lose your license if you don't use the right kind of body paint. In North Carolina, there have been about 1,000 officers who have lost their license over the last 30 or 40 years. Do you think delicensure might be an effective way of handling these kinds of cases? Because the law may not find that any of these officers broke the law, but they certainly have no trust in the community after this.
Oh, yeah, of course. When officers lose trust, when they break code, when they break that ethical boundary, they can no longer police anymore. That's one of the things we talk about in policing all the time. You have to have high ethical values. You got to maintain those ethical values, and there's got to be consequences for it. I think a national database of officers so they can't switch agency to agency would be a great idea. You've got a lot of times officers, and this happens a lot in North Carolina, an officer can resign in light of being fired and turn around and get a job somewhere else. So they take the problem somewhere else instead of firing. And a lot of times the chiefs are hesitant to fire them because it's easier to let them resign. You don't have to worry about backlash. You don't have to worry about appeals and things like that. But yeah, most definitely, that's one of the things we got to do in policing today. We got to get rid of the bad cops. You know, I think most cops are good. I think most cops want to work with good cops. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a police chief. It's actually Edenton. You said Edenton. That's okay.
Oh,
but Edenton, North Carolina. But we were talking about it. One thing that's got to be abolished in policing is the blue wall of silence. You've probably heard about that before, you know. Yeah. So there's been a tradition where cops look out for other cops, even though they know they're doing the wrong thing. And that's got to stop. You know, cops got to turn each other in. There needs to be consequences for that as well. If you're involved in something and you don't help, that's got to be a consequence.
So I want to take this to Mr. Buckhalter, because that's something else, this idea of wandering officers, right? You know, Mr. Fortenberry said, hey, we should have a national registry, but this is a serious issue. Many police officers who are allowed to resign, instead of being fired from one place, they just go up the street, they go to another part of town. The most famous might be Timothy Lohman, who was a police officer who's basically let go of the Independence Police Department in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, went 15 minutes up the road, got a job with the Cleveland Shops, and shot Tamir Rice. My question for you is, you know, what kind of resistance do you think there would be to a national registry of police, and what kind of consequences would you have to put on local departments to make sure that they respect, hey, if this guy got delicensed in this state, we can't let him or her move to this other state and do the same thing?
Well, I think there's certainly, it's a good question. I think there certainly will be some resistance from the unions and so forth. And we have to remember a couple of things. One, that I loved being a police officer, but it was a privilege and a job, not a right. I did not have the right to be a police officer. The other way that this can have some teeth is to tie it into the Edward Byrne Fund. Edward Byrne was a police officer here in New York City that lost his life in the 80s. He was tragically assassinated, and there is now a fund named after him. And this is where police departments receive millions and millions of dollars from the federal government. And that can be used as a carrot or a stick. There is no reason why police officers should be able to travel from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. If you are not ethically and morally bound or good enough to serve in one jurisdiction, how could you possibly be good enough to serve in another?
Right, and another. Thank you guys so very much. Trust me, we will have you back because this is an important conversation. Thank you, Jay Fortenberry and Kirk Buckhalter.